Hello everyone, I know you watched this video to accompany you to sleep. So if you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to tell me where you are from and what time you watched this video. Let's jump straight into the story. Story 1. It was a calm afternoon on May 7th, 2017 in the small town of Bel Air, Ohio, when everything suddenly changed. David Kinney, along with his wife Sherry and their young daughter, went to visit his close friend, Brad McGarry. They had a simple task in mind, returning a weed trimmer. But as they approached the house, something didn't feel right. No one answered the front door, and a growing sense of worry took hold of the family. David led them around to the back, where they found the service door slightly open. Inside, the house was a mess, with clear signs that something had gone terribly wrong. Sherry called out for Brad, but the only response was an eerie silence. When Brad didn't answer, David decided to check the basement. What he found there would change their lives forever. David Kinney was a young man who led an ordinary life. As he reached the age of 21, his mother decided to throw a big celebration in his honor. Among the guests at this party was Sherry, a beautiful single mother who attended with her sons. During the course of the evening, David found himself deeply captivated by Sherry, feeling an instant connection. The next day, he confided in his mother that he had found the love of his life, and was determined to make his relationship with Sherry official. Despite Sherry's admirable qualities, some people in David's circle questioned his decision to marry a woman with 3 young children, citing the heavy responsibility it entailed for someone so young. However, David was a young man full of commitment and love. He was ready to take on the responsibilities that came with integrating into Sherry's family and building a beautiful life together. To ensure he could provide for his new family, David enrolled in a course to become a coal miner, a tough and risky job, but one that offered good pay to cover the needs of his household. It was during this training that David met Brad McGarry. Brad, born in the 1970s in Cambridge, Ohio, had faced numerous challenges growing up. Openly gay in a conservative environment, Brad had endured insults and prejudice, but had always stood firm in living his truth. Over time, he built a close-knit group of friends and pursued a career in hairstyling, though in a small, working-class town, it was a challenging profession. Eventually, Brad made the bold decision to switch careers, opting to become a coal miner, despite the stark contrast to his previous work. David and Brad quickly became friends, with Brad even becoming a beloved figure in David's family, earning the affectionate nickname Uncle Brad from David's children. The two friends were inseparable, always sharing jokes and good times together. By 2017, David was 30 years old, happily married to Sherry, and their children were growing up. Brad, on the other hand, was balancing his work-family time and a secret romance. On May 7th, 2017, after attending a family gathering, Brad told a cousin that he needed to return to his home for a meeting. Later that day, around 6:15 p.m., David, Sherry, and their youngest daughter stopped by Brad's house. They were surprised when Brad didn't answer the door, even though his car was parked outside. Concerned, they went around to the back of the house and found the service door unlocked. After calling out to Brad without a response, David entered the house while Sherry searched upstairs. David's search led him to the basement, where he was met with a horrifying sight: Brad's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. Sherry, responding to her husband's scream, rushed downstairs and was equally shocked by the grim scene. Sherry immediately called 911, and the police were soon alerted to the discovery of Brad's body, the victim of a fatal gunshot wound. When the police arrived, they found David and Sherry visibly shaken, recounting their story of how they had come to check on their friend and were met with a terrible tragedy. The couple explained their close relationship with Brad, emphasizing the deep bond that had formed over the years. The Kinney family shared that they often spent holidays with Brad, and their children loved him like an uncle. They had even planned a trip to the Bahamas with him in August of that year. When asked about any enemies or troubling circumstances in Brad's life, David and Sherry mentioned that Brad had recently ended a tumultuous relationship with a man named Scotty, although they didn't know his last name. They described the relationship as fraught with conflict, with frequent heated arguments. After gathering as much information as possible from the witnesses, the officers began to thoroughly examine the scene before drawing any conclusions. In the basement, they found Brad's body lying face down on the floor with a large pool of blood surrounding his head. At first glance, it was clear that he had been shot at least once in the head. Despite the obvious signs, The officers initially speculated that Brad might have been going through a difficult time and possibly taken his own life. When the forensic expert arrived at the scene, he asked the officers if they had found a weapon, to which they replied that they had not. However, since it's common for individuals who take their own lives to fall on the weapon, the forensic team decided to turn the body over. Upon doing so, they found no weapon, quickly dispelling the initial suicide theory. As they continued to survey the house, the police tried to piece together the crime scene. They noticed that the house seemed to have been ransacked in a peculiar way. The kitchen was in disarray, with several drawers left open, and the living room was also in a state of chaos. The authorities initially suspected that Brad's death might have been the result of a robbery gone wrong. However, after conducting a more thorough inspection, the detectives realized that no valuable items had been stolen, despite there being several worth taking. They also noted that Brad was a collector of rural-style art, and his home contained many valuable items. If the intruder had been a common thief, it was also odd that the television remained in place and there was money scattered on the floor. Considering all these clues, the police became convinced that the robbery was staged to mislead them. Given that Brad was an openly gay man working in a coal mine, the detectives considered the possibility that he might have upset some of his more conservative co-workers, potentially leading to a hate crime. However, when they spoke with his colleagues at the mine, they were surprised to find that everyone respected and admired Brad, describing him as a good man. This theory was quickly discarded. The detectives also interviewed Brad's friends and family, trying to establish a timeline and gather as much information as possible. According to David and Sherry's statement at the scene, Brad had recently ended a toxic relationship with a man named Scotty, which was confirmed by Brad's friend, Wendy. Wendy told the police that she had also been against the relationship, noting that Brad had become too involved with Scotty and things had started to get very strange. Following this lead, the detectives obtained the full name of Scotty and immediately went to his house to question him. However, when they arrived, Scotty's mother informed them that he had been in jail for 3 months for violating his probation. While this ruled out Scotty as the perpetrator, the detectives did not completely dismiss him as a suspect. They theorized that he might have orchestrated the crime from behind bars with the help of an accomplice. The police visited Scotty in jail to inform him of his ex-boyfriend's death and gauge his reaction. Scotty seemed genuinely shaken by the news, and by the end of the interview, the detectives had nearly ruled out his involvement in the crime. Desperate for answers, the detectives decided to canvass the neighborhood to see if any cameras had captured footage near Brad's house. Fortunately, a neighbor had a camera facing the street close to Brad's home, which could potentially reveal who had come and gone. While they began reviewing the hours of footage, they continued interviewing friends and family. The case seemed to be reaching a dead end until 2 days later when the detectives interviewed a cousin of Brad, whose testimony shifted the investigation. He revealed that on the day of the incident, Brad had left the family lunch gathering between 1:30 and 2 p.m., but not before mentioning that a man named DJ was supposed to visit his house. He added that Brad had jokingly said he was planning to take a nap with his guest, hinting at a romantic intention. He further disclosed that Brad had confided in her that the man he was seeing was married and had not yet come out to his wife about their homosexual relationship. He also told the detectives that the relationship with DJ had been ongoing for years and that they had managed to keep it under wraps. Despite being reluctant to reveal the true identity of Brad's lover, he finally gave in under the pressure of the lead investigator, dropping a bombshell name. The officer was stunned to hear that DJ was actually David, the very man who had discovered Brad's lifeless body. When asked if she was certain about her statements, he confirmed that David was indeed the only man Brad had ever mentioned to her. The detectives later commented that when they discovered DJ was David, the person who had found the body while visiting the house with his family, everything suddenly became clear. Up until that point, David had been viewed as a significant witness in the case, appearing genuinely shaken and grieving over his friend's death. This unexpected twist in the story, however, instantly turned him into the prime suspect. The detectives, under the guise of needing to retrieve photos from his phone related to the crime scene, convinced David to hand over his device. In reality, they were tracking his location during the time Brad was killed and searching for evidence that might confirm a relationship beyond mere friendship. When they reviewed the phone's location data, they discovered that David's phone had been at Brad's house at the time of the fatal shooting. Although David had deleted incriminating messages, A deeper forensic analysis uncovered text messages between him and Brad that confirmed their sexual relationship. Meanwhile, the team reviewing the footage from Brad's neighbor's surveillance camera found that David had indeed driven to Brad's house just before the estimated time of the attack. Notably, he had arrived in his wife's car, not his own. They documented the duration of his visit, noting that he left about 40 minutes later. The footage also captured David returning hours later in his truck, accompanied by his family, under the pretense of delivering a weed trimmer that Brad had supposedly requested. After compiling all this evidence, the police were confident they had enough to prove that David had been at Brad's house both before and during the time of his death. It was time to confront him with the truth. When the detectives presented David with the damning data retrieved from his phone, he admitted to being at the house but changed his story multiple times during the lengthy interrogation, offering up to 7 or 8 different versions of events. At one point, David claimed that a third unidentified man had been in Brad's house, and after a heated argument, this unknown individual shot Brad. He insisted that the man had threatened him into silence before allowing him to leave. However, the detective made it clear that he didn't believe this story, prompting David to alter his account once again. When pressed to tell the truth, David eventually confessed to hiding his affair from his wife, Sherry, but insisted that it had only been going on for a few months, not years. He claimed that Brad had not been pressuring him to leave his wife and move in together, but had grown angry when David tried to end their romantic relationship that afternoon. David alleged that Brad had brandished a gun, waving it in his face, which terrified him. He said the argument escalated into a physical struggle, during which he managed to wrestle the gun away and shot Brad in the forehead, asserting that he had acted in self-defense. David also admitted to firing another shot at Brad while he was on the ground. The detectives quickly refuted this version of events, pointing out that the basic laws of physics made David's account impossible. The forensic analysis of Brad's body revealed that he had been shot twice, both times in the back of the head, indicating that the shooter had been standing behind him. When asked about the weapon, David claimed he had disposed of it while fleeing the scene. Law enforcement officers were seen combing the area in the days that followed, but the murder weapon was never recovered. Despite the missing weapon, the investigators were certain they had their man. Before taking David to jail, they allowed him to speak with his wife. The conversation between David and Sherry was closely observed by the detectives. David confessed to Sherry about the affair and expressed regret for not handling things differently, admitting that he couldn't undo what had been done. Sherry, shocked by the enormity of his revelation, was left speechless. David reiterated to her what he had told the detectives. Sherry, through tears, asked him if he was mocking her with such an explanation, and said she couldn't even bear to look at him. This conversation confirmed to the police that Sherry had no prior knowledge of the events that had transpired behind her back. On May 9th, David was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Investigators hypothesized that Brad, frustrated with keeping their relationship a secret, had likely threatened to reveal the truth to Sherry, giving David the motive to kill his friend and maintain his double life. After several days in custody, David appeared in court for a marathon preliminary hearing held in mid-May 2017. There, he faced charges for the murder of Brad. He kept his gaze fixed on the floor as the investigating officers testified, and the prosecutors focused on the inconsistencies in the story he had told them. The police described how David had appeared visibly distraught at the scene of Brad's murder, experiencing physical discomfort, including trouble breathing and episodes of vomiting. He also recounted David's initial written statement, in which he claimed to be a simple friend who had gone to deliver a weed trimmer and had inadvertently discovered Brad's lifeless body in the basement. The lead investigator presented David's final statement, in which he confessed to shooting Brad in self-defense with a weapon that, despite exhaustive efforts, was never found. The autopsy results were a critical turning point that completely dismantled David's self-defense claim, as they showed that the victim, Brad, had been shot twice in the back of the head, which was inconsistent with an act of self-defense. David's defense attorney addressed the court, arguing that David did not pose a threat to society, and that the tragic events leading to Brad's death were the result of unique circumstances. He asserted that if a crime had been committed, it was manslaughter, not murder, and claimed that David had acted in self-defense. Meanwhile, David remained silent during the nearly 3-hour hearing, where witnesses took the stand. After reviewing all the evidence and testimonies, the judge found probable cause to send the case to the county court and set bail at $1 million. David's defense immediately requested a reduction in the bail amount, arguing that it was impossible for David to pay. However, the judge denied the request. Several weeks later, David's defense attorney filed more than a dozen motions during a hearing. Among these motions was another request to reduce David's bail. Numerous friends and family members of David attended the hearing to show their support. The lawyer asked that the bail be reduced to $250,000, an amount that the Kinney family could manage. He called several witnesses to the stand, including David's wife, his mother, his father-in-law, and his stepfather. All of them testified to David's good character, describing him as an honorable, hard-working, and responsible man, as well as a loving husband and father. Sherry testified that her husband had provided emotional and material support to their 3 children for the past 10 years, even though he was not their biological father. During cross-examination, Sherry was questioned about the events of May 7th when David took her and their daughter to Brad's house. She said her husband told her they were going to return a weed trimmer. When asked by the judge if her husband had acted strangely that day, Sherry said she did not notice anything unusual at the house. She described how they arrived, knocked on the door, found the back door open, and entered the house, which appeared to have been ransacked before David went to the basement and shouted for her to call 911. After hearing all the arguments, the judge concluded that the testimonies regarding David's character did not justify a reduction in bail. He based his decision on the fact that the defendant had taken his wife and daughter to a house where a dead body was present, under the pretense that he was just passing by and was unaware of what had happened. The judge added that David had blatantly lied to his wife and daughter. Later, David's trial began and lasted for a week. During the trial, the prosecution presented the evidence we've already discussed, such as the neighbor's surveillance video showing David arriving at Brad's house before the time of the crime and returning later with his family. The prosecution also showed police body cam footage that clearly demonstrated David had been lying from the start. One of the most striking pieces of testimony came from a forensic expert who discussed the DNA evidence found at the scene. The expert revealed that the DNA from a used condom showed Brad's DNA on the outside and the DNA of an unknown male on the inside, but there was no trace of David's DNA. This revelation was controversial because it contradicted the accusations made by a detective who believed that David had decided Brad had to die to keep his secret and his family life intact. According to the detective, David had lured Brad with the promise of sex, killed him, and then covered up the crime as best he could. Meanwhile, the defense maintained that David had acted out of fear and in self-defense. Although the defense attorney admitted that David had not always told the truth and that some of his actions were odd, he reiterated that this did not make David a criminal. The prosecution countered that 2 bullets to the back of the head were not acts of self-defense, pointing out that Brad had been on his knees when he received the first shot to the upper part of his head and the second to the lower part of his skull. After hearing the closing arguments, the jury deliberated for 4 hours. Tension filled the courtroom as the jury returned, and when the judge read the unanimous verdict, they found David Kinney guilty of the aggravated murder of Brad. The verdict was met with gasps and tears from those present. Before his sentence was handed down, David was given the opportunity to speak. He began by apologizing to Brad's family for all the pain and suffering he had caused. He said he never intended for any of this to happen and wished he could take it all back. David acknowledged that no amount of apologies could ever bring Brad back, but he wanted the family to know that he truly regretted everything that had occurred. However, the judge was unmoved by David's apologies. The judge recounted the numerous lies David had told to cover up his actions and stated that the crime was a cold and calculated execution followed by an elaborate cover-up. The judge said that David had premeditated Brad's murder, luring him with the promise of sex, setting up the crime scene, and taking multiple steps to conceal his crime. The judge had 4 sentencing options, all involving life imprisonment, but varying in the possibility of parole after 20, 25, or 30 years. David's defense attorney urged the judge to choose one of these options, arguing that David had been a law-abiding citizen with no criminal record before the tragic events of that day. However, the prosecutor urged the judge to impose life without parole, emphasizing that Brad had lost his life and that his family would have to live with that loss forever. In response, the judge stated that if David was capable of ending the life of someone who loved him and was his best friend, it raised concerns about what he might do to someone who opposed him. Therefore, he could not allow David to ever return to public life. In February 2018, David was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole, with an additional 3 years for a firearm specification, meaning he had possessed a weapon while committing the crime. The police remarked that the entire case was a tragedy that could have been avoided if David had not been so concerned with keeping his homosexuality a secret. As of mid-2023, prison records indicated that David remained incarcerated in Ohio. From the moment of his conviction, his attorney had tried to appeal the sentence, always seeking the possibility of parole for his client, but those appeals had been denied. Tragically, while David would never return to the coal mines, Brad would not either, as both their lives had been irreversibly altered by David's actions. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Story 2. A quiet morning in Santa Ana, California, where the rain fell softly over the streets, washing away the remnants of yesterday. But for one family, this day would mark the end of innocence, the unraveling of a tragedy that no one could have foreseen. It was supposed to be a joyful occasion, a 3-day trip to Disneyland, a chance for a mother and her son to bond, to create memories that would last a lifetime. Sarita Rummerju, a 48-year-old woman originally from India, had planned the trip meticulously. She had purchased tickets to the theme park, packed souvenirs for her son, and booked a room at the La Quinta Inn and Suites in Santa Ana. To the outside world, it seemed like a simple custody visit, a mother spending time with her child before returning him to his father. But what unfolded in that motel room would leave a community in shock and a family shattered beyond repair. At 9:12 a.m., a call was made to emergency services. The voice on the other end was calm, almost detached, as it delivered a chilling confession. I've killed my son. The caller was Sarita Rummerju, and her words would set in motion an investigation that revealed the darkest depths of human emotion and the devastating consequences of unresolved conflict. When police arrived at the scene, they found an 11-year-old boy, Yaden Rummerju, lying lifeless on the bed. His throat had been slit, and his body was surrounded by Disneyland merchandise, a haunting juxtaposition of innocence and violence. Nearby, a large kitchen knife, purchased just the day before, lay as silent testimony to the crime. Sarita herself was found in the room, having ingested pills in what appeared to be an attempt to end her own life. She was rushed to the hospital, treated, and later taken into custody. The question that lingered in the minds of investigators and the community alike was simple yet profound. Why? This was not a random act of violence. It was the culmination of years of tension, a custody battle that had left scars on everyone involved. Sarita and her ex-husband, Prakash Raju, had divorced in 2018, and since then, their son had been caught in the crossfire of their disputes. Court documents revealed allegations of substance abuse, control issues, and unilateral decisions about the child's upbringing. But none of these details could fully explain the events of that morning. What drives a parent to commit the unthinkable? What emotions, what circumstances lead to a moment where love turns to tragedy? These are the questions we'll explore tonight, as we delve into the chilling case of Sarita Rummerju and the loss of her son, Yaden. Sarita Rummerju was a mother, a daughter, and at one time a wife. Her life had been filled with moments of joy, but also moments of profound pain that seemed to shape her choices and actions in ways that were difficult to understand. Born and raised in India, Sarita was described by those who knew her as intelligent and hardworking. She had moved to the United States in her early 30s, seeking new opportunities and a fresh start. It was during her time in California that she met Prakash Raju, a fellow immigrant who shared her dreams of building a better future. The two married and settled into a modest home in Santa Ana, where they welcomed their son, Yaden Rummerju, into the world. For a time, life seemed stable, a family navigating the challenges of parenthood and marriage, while also balancing the complexities of being far from their native country. But stability can be fleeting. By 2018, the cracks in their relationship had become too deep to mend, and Sarita and Prakash divorced. The custody arrangement for Yaden became a contentious issue, as both parents sought to maintain a connection with their son despite their separation. Court documents revealed a history of disagreements between the two, a tug-of-war over parenting styles, finances, and visitation schedules. Sarita alleged that Prakash was controlling, while he claimed she made unilateral decisions about Yadna's upbringing. Through it all, Yadna remained the center of their world, a bright, curious child with a love for adventure. He adored Disneyland, often talking about the characters and attractions with excitement that could light up a room. For Sarita, these moments with her son were precious, a chance to bond, to step away from the strain of her divorce, and to create memories that would last a lifetime. In March 2025, Sarita planned a 3-day trip to Disneyland. It was a custody visit, scheduled as part of the court agreement, and an opportunity for her to spend quality time with Jotun before returning him to Prakash. The trip was meant to be a joyous occasion, a chance for mother and son to escape into a world of magic and wonder. Sarita spared no detail in planning that she purchased tickets to the park, booked a room at the La Quinta Inn and Suites in Santa Ana, and even bought souvenirs to bring home. To those observing from the outside, it seemed like an ordinary family outing, a brief reprieve from the complexities of custody disputes. But even as the trip unfolded, there were subtle signs that something was amiss. Sarita's demeanor, according to those who interacted with her, seemed unusually withdrawn. She appeared to be carrying a weight that no amount of Disneyland magic could lift. And while Jotun expressed his excitement about the trip, those closest to him noticed an unease, a quiet tension that seemed to linger in the background. The timeline of events leading up to the crime is both haunting and tragic. On the first day of the trip, Sarita and Jotun visited the park, exploring the attractions and sharing moments of joy. Photographs captured smiles and laughter, but beneath the surface, there were questions that no camera could answer. On the second day, Sarita purchased a large kitchen knife, a seemingly ordinary act that would later take on a chilling significance. By the third day, the mood had shifted. The trip was drawing to a close, and Jotun was scheduled to return to his father's custody. The details of what happened next remain unclear, but what is known is that Sarita and Jotun returned to their motel room, where the unimaginable took place. For those who knew the family, the news of Jotun's death was incomprehensible. Neighbors and friends described Sarita as a devoted mother, someone who seemed to genuinely care for her son's well-being. They struggled to reconcile the person they had known with the actions she was accused of. Prakash, too, was left grappling with an unimaginable loss. His grief was compounded by questions about what had led to this tragedy and whether anything could have been done to prevent it. The community in Santa Ana, like so many communities before it, found itself drawn into the ripple effects of the crime. Candlelight vigils were held, prayers were offered, and conversations about mental health and parental conflict began to surface. Yet for all the efforts to make sense of the tragedy, the loss of Jotun remained a wound that would not heal. As investigators arrived at the La Quinta Inn and Suites on the morning of March 19, 2025, they were confronted with a crime scene that spoke volumes, both in its silence and in the chilling details it held. The motel room, ordinary in its layout, had become the setting for an act of violence that would leave lasting ripples in its wake. On the bed lay 11-year-old Yadav Rumraju. His throat had been slit, and his lifeless body was surrounded by souvenirs from Disneyland, items that just days before had symbolized joy, adventure, and innocent childhood dreams. These souvenirs, carefully chosen by his mother during their trip, now stood as a haunting reminder of the events that had unfolded. Nearby on the nightstand, a large kitchen knife was found, the same knife purchased by Sarita Rumraju the day before. Its presence at the scene was a grim testimony to the planning that had preceded the crime. Investigators also discovered an empty bottle of pills, which Sarita had ingested in what appeared to be an attempt to take her own life. She was found in the room, conscious but clearly affected by the pills, and was rushed to the hospital for treatment. Her condition stabilized, allowing law enforcement to take her into custody shortly afterward. Sarita's statements to the police were both chilling and perplexing. When questioned, she reportedly remained calm and composed, a demeanor that struck investigators as unusual given the gravity of her actions. Her confession was straightforward, I killed my son. I didn't want him to go back to his father. These words, simple yet devastating, opened a window into the complex emotions and circumstances that had led to the crime. As the investigation progressed, additional pieces of evidence were collected, each contributing to the story investigators were piecing together. Alongside the knife and the souvenirs, Sarita's phone records and personal writings were examined, revealing a pattern of communication that hinted at her state of mind in the days leading up to the crime. Text messages sent to friends and family showed signs of distress, as well as hints of unresolved tension related to the custody arrangement. Soon after her arrest, Sarita was formally charged with murder under special circumstances, a designation reserved for cases involving particularly heinous acts or motives. The charges carried the possibility of the death penalty, a stark reminder of the gravity of the crime and the legal system's stance on acts of this nature. Prosecutors argued that the crime was premeditated, citing the purchase of the knife and Sarita's statements to law enforcement as evidence of her intent. The defense, however, painted a different picture, one of a mother overwhelmed by years of custody battles and emotional strain. They raised questions about her mental state, suggesting that her actions may have been driven by psychological distress rather than pure malice. The legal proceedings captured the attention of not only the local community, but also the broader public. News outlets reported extensively on the case, dissecting every detail and offering expert analysis on the potential outcomes. For many, the trial became a focal point for discussions about family dynamics, custody disputes, and the profound impact of mental health on decision-making. In Santa Ana, the community grappled with the emotional toll of the tragedy. Candlelight vigils were held for Yadim, as neighbors and friends came together to mourn the loss of a young life taken too soon. The sight of the child's photographs displayed among flickering candles evoked both sorrow and a deep sense of injustice. The motel where the crime occurred became a symbol of the event, its unassuming exterior masking the pain and loss experienced within its walls. For those who frequented the area, passing by the La Quinta Inn and Suites became a quiet reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of vigilance in addressing familial and mental health challenges. Prakash Raju, Yatin's father, faced an unimaginable grief. His statements to the media reflected the depth of his pain and the lingering questions that haunted him. I trusted the system to protect my son, and now he's gone. I don't know how to move forward. His words resonated with many, as the case highlighted the complexities of custody arrangements and the vulnerabilities of those caught in their crossfire. As the case unfolded, experts in psychology and criminal behavior were called upon to shed light on Sarita's motives. Her actions, though incomprehensible to many, were analyzed through the lens of emotional strain, unresolved trauma, and the pressures of her custody battle. Psychologists noted that years of conflict with her ex-husband may have contributed to a sense of helplessness and desperation. Sarita's writings and statements suggested that she perceived the custody arrangement as a constant battle, one that she felt unable to win. This perception, coupled with her apparent struggles with mental health, painted a picture of a mother overwhelmed by circumstances she believed were beyond her control. While such analysis offers insight into Sarita's state of mind, it does not absolve her of responsibility for her actions. The loss of Yatin remains a profound tragedy, one that serves as a reminder of the need for support systems and resources for families navigating conflict and mental health challenges. With the investigation complete and the legal proceedings underway, the story of Sarita Ramaraju and her son Yatin continues to evoke both sorrow and reflection. As we move forward, we'll explore the resolution of the case and the lessons it offers for those seeking to understand and prevent such tragedies. The courtroom was quiet as Sarita Ramaraju made her first appearance before a judge. The gravity of the charges against her hung heavily in the air: special circumstances murder, a designation reserved for cases involving particularly heinous crimes. Sarita, dressed in a plain jumpsuit, sat silently, her expression unreadable. Her defense attorney stood beside her, prepared to navigate one of the most complex cases of their careers. The prosecution presented their case methodically, outlining the events of March 19, 2025, and the evidence collected from the motel room. They argued that Sarita's actions were premeditated, pointing to the purchase of the knife and her statements to law enforcement as clear indicators of intent. The chilling confession Sarita had made during her 911 call was played for the court, leaving those in the room visibly shaken. She knew what she was doing, the prosecutor stated firmly. This was not an act of impulse, it was calculated, deliberate, and devastating. The defense, however, painted a different picture. They described Sarita as a mother overwhelmed by years of emotional strain, citing her mental health struggles and the pressures of her custody battle as contributing factors. They argued that her actions, while inexcusable, were driven by a profound sense of hopelessness rather than malice. Expert witnesses were called upon to testify about Sarita's psychological state, offering insights into the impact of chronic stress and unresolved trauma. The trial spanned several weeks, drawing attention from the media and the public. News outlets dissected every detail of the proceedings, while commentators debated the implications of the case. Was this a story of justice, or a tragedy born from systemic failure? Was Sarita a criminal, or a victim of circumstances beyond her control? These questions lingered, both in the courtroom and in the hearts of those following the case. As the trial came to an end, the broader implications of the case began to emerge. Discussions about custody arrangements and parental conflict took center stage, as experts highlighted the challenges faced by families navigating divorce and co-parenting. The court documents reveal the history of disagreements between Sarita and her ex-husband, Prakash Raju, disagreements that had placed Yotan at the center of a battle neither parents seemed able to resolve. This case also underscored the importance of mental health support for parents and children alike. Sarita's psychological state, while not excusing her actions, shed light on the need for resources and interventions that address emotional strain before it leads to tragedy. Advocates called for increased awareness of mental health challenges in custody disputes, emphasizing the need for systemic change to protect vulnerable families. For the community in Santa Ana, the loss of Yotan remained an open wound. Vigils were held in his memory, and conversations about preventing similar tragedies continued. The motel where the crime occurred became a quiet symbol of the events, a place where grief lingered, even as life went on around it. The pain of this case is immeasurable. Yotan Ramarju, a bright, curious child with a love for adventure, was taken from the world far too soon. His absence is felt not only by his family, but by all who knew him and followed his story. Sarita's journey through the legal system is far from over, and the questions that remain about motive, justice, and the human capacity for resilience will continue to be debated. But as we reflect on this tragedy, it is essential to remember the lessons it offers. While justice may be served in the courtroom, the pain of this loss will linger in the hearts of those who knew and loved Yadu. It is a reminder of the fragility of life, the importance of compassion, and the need for systems that support families in times of conflict and crisis. Story 2: The vanishing at Emerald Lake in the summer of 1987. A small lakeside community would forever be changed when a local photographer vanished without a trace. The peaceful waters of Emerald Lake had always been a sanctuary for those seeking solitude and natural beauty. But after that fateful July evening, the gentle ripples on its surface seemed to whisper of mysteries beneath. Emerald Lake earned its name from the remarkable green hue its waters took on during late afternoon sunlight. The surrounding pine forests created a perfect frame for the water, their reflection doubling their majesty on calm days. Nestled in a valley between rolling hills, the lake was accessible by a single winding road that meandered through dense woodland before revealing the breathtaking view that had captivated visitors for generations. Several dozen cabins and permanent homes dotted the shoreline, most built in the 1950s and 60s when the area first became a retreat for those seeking escape from city life. The town itself was modest, a general store that doubled as a post office, a small diner known for homemade pie that attracted weekend tourists, and a community center that hosted everything from town meetings to the annual summer festival. The residents knew each other by name, their lives intertwined through decades of shared experiences, seasonal celebrations, and the occasional disagreement that was impossible to avoid in such close quarters. Children grew up swimming in the cool waters during summer breaks, teenagers found hidden coves for first kisses, and elderly residents claimed the lake had healing properties for their aging joints. Marion Wells had been a fixture at Emerald Lake for nearly 15 years by the summer of 1987. At 43, she was neither the oldest nor the youngest permanent resident, but she held a special place in the communities originally from Boston. Marion had discovered the lake during a cross-country photography trip, and, as she often told newcomers with a knowing smile, the lake claimed me before I could claim it. Within 6 months of her first visit, she had sold her city apartment, purchased a modest cabin on the eastern shore, and established herself as the area's unofficial chronicler. Marion's photography had started as a passion, but evolved into a respectable career. Her work appeared in nature magazines, travel publications, and she had published 2 coffee table books showcasing the changing seasons at Emerald Lake. Her cabin's walls displayed her favorite images: sunrise over still waters, deer drinking at the shoreline at dusk, ice formations along the rocks during particularly cold winters. But Marion didn't limit herself to landscapes. She documented the community itself: children's birthday parties, weddings at the lakeside, holiday gatherings at the community center. Her camera was as familiar a sight as her trademark denim jacket and the wide-brimmed hat she wore to shield her face from summer sun. Those who knew Marian described her as thoughtful and observant, qualities that served her well in her chosen profession. She spoke with a slight Boston accent that 15 years in rural surroundings hadn't erased. And she had a habit of twisting a strand of her graying auburn hair when deep in thought. She lived alone save for a black Labrador named Shadow who accompanied her on daily walks along the lakeshore and hiking trails. Though private about her past, she was generous with her time, teaching photography workshops for interested locals and donating her images for community fundraisers. The day Marian disappeared began like any other summer day at Emerald Lake. July 17th dawned clear and promised the kind of perfect weather that brought residents outdoors and visitors to the public beach. Marian was seen having breakfast at the local diner around 8:30 that morning. She chatted with the waitress about plans to photograph a pair of eagles that had nested on the far side of the lake, mentioning she might take her small rowboat out to get closer to their habitat. Several people recalled seeing her loading her camera equipment, a Nikon F3 camera with several lenses, her tripod, and the weatherproof bags she used to protect her gear, into her boat around 10 a.m. Mrs. Eleanor Tompkins, whose cabin had a direct view of the lake's western cove, reported seeing Marian's boat near the eagle nesting area around noon. She was standing carefully, adjusting something on her camera, Mrs. Tompkins later told investigators. I remember thinking she should be careful about her balance in that small boat. That was the last time anyone saw her. When Shadow returned to the marina alone around 4 p.m., wet and agitated, the owner, James Harrington, knew something was wrong. That dog never left Marian's side voluntarily, he explained, and especially not when they were out on the water. James called the local sheriff immediately and organized a search party of volunteers using every available boat on the lake. They found Marian's rowboat drifting near the northern shore just before sunset. Her camera equipment was still there, her Nikon carefully placed in its waterproof case, a telephoto lens attached. Her notebook was open to a page with hastily scribbled observations about the eagle's behavior and a rough sketch of their nest location. A half-empty water bottle and an untouched sandwich in her cooler suggested she had planned to stay out longer. But Marian herself was nowhere to be found. As twilight deepened into night, flashlights scanned the shoreline while boats continued to patrol the water. Sheriff Robert Thompson called in additional officers from neighboring counties, and by morning, a formal search and rescue operation was underway. Divers explored the lake depths, while teams with dogs combed the surrounding woods. Marian's cabin was examined for any clues, but everything appeared normal. Dishes washed in the sink, bed neatly made, upcoming photography assignments noted on her calendar. Days passed without any sign of Marian. The eagles she had gone to photograph continued their daily routines, oblivious to the human drama unfolding below their nest. Shadow refused to leave the dock, watching each returning boat with hopeful eyes that gradually grew more distant as the search continued without result. The community rallied as communities do in times of crisis. Volunteers prepared meals for search teams, local businesses donated supplies, and Marian's photography students organized a system to feed Shadow and maintain her cabin in her absence. She's coming back, insisted Lily Chin, a 16-year-old who had been taking lessons from Marian that summer. She knows these waters better than anyone. But as July turned to August, hope began to fade. The official search was scaled back after 2 weeks of exhaustive efforts yielded nothing. Theories multiplied in the absence of evidence. Some suggested Marian had fallen overboard and drowned, though no body was recovered despite extensive diving operations. Others wondered if she had encountered trouble on shore, perhaps an animal attack or a fall in the rugged terrain around the lake. A few whispered about the possibility of foul play, though Marian had no known enemies and her gentle nature made conflict unlikely. The mystery deepened when Marian's film from that day was developed. The final exposures showed the eagle nest from various angles, exactly as expected. But the last 3 frames captured something unexpected, what appeared to be a reflection in the water of an unusual light pattern among the trees on the far shore. Photography experts couldn't determine exactly what had created the effect, whether it was natural sunlight filtering through leaves or something else entirely. Did Marian notice something that prompted her to go ashore to investigate? The images raised questions but provided no answers. Sheriff Thompson followed every possible lead. He interviewed seasonal visitors who had been at the lake that weekend, checked hospital records throughout the region, and even investigated Marian's past in Boston for any connections that might explain her disappearance. Her former colleagues and friends from the city expressed shock and offered what information they could, but nothing illuminated the mystery. One curious detail emerged from Marian's financial records. 3 months before her disappearance, she had withdrawn a significant amount from her savings account and deposited it in a separate bank. When questioned, her accountant mentioned that Marian had been discussing a special project that required investment, but she had shared no details about its nature. Was this connected to her disappearance, or merely a coincidence? As summer faded into fall, Emerald Lake struggled to return to normal. The annual Harvest Festival was held as usual, but with subdued spirits. Marian's empty chair at the community potluck dinner served as a poignant reminder of their loss. Shadow eventually accepted food from Lily Chen's hand, and the teenager took on the responsibility of caring for the aging dog, walking him along the same paths Marian had frequented. In October, a development briefly rekindled hope. A hiker in a state park some 30 miles from Emerald Lake found a weathered leather camera strap with Marian's distinctive hand-tooled initials. A thorough search of the area turned up nothing else, leaving authorities to wonder how the item had traveled so far. Had Marian herself gone there? Had someone taken it from her boat? The discovery raised more questions than it answered. Throughout the following winter, sightings of Marian were reported in various locations. A woman matching her description buying groceries in a town 50 miles away, someone with her distinctive walk boarding a bus to Canada, a photographer with auburn hair asking unusual questions at a regional wildlife office. Each lead was investigated, but none proved substantive. A year after Marian's disappearance, the community held a memorial service. Not a funeral. Many still resisted declaring her dead without evidence, but a celebration of her life and work. Her photographs were displayed throughout the community center, a visual history of the lake and its people. Former students shared stories of her patience and insight. Shadow, now noticeably grayer around the muzzle, lay quietly beneath her portrait. The investigation remained officially open, but inactive as years passed. Sheriff Thompson retired in 1992, handing the unsolved case to his successor with a thick file of interviews, theories, and dead ends. "It's the one that will haunt me," he admitted at his retirement party. People don't just vanish without a trace. But Marian Wells had done exactly that. The mystery of what happened on that summer day continued to spark occasional theories and discussions around Emerald Lake. Some residents claimed to sense her presence on foggy mornings when the lake's surface was perfectly still. Others insisted they had glimpsed her silhouette among the trees at dusk, camera in hand, still searching for the perfect shot. 5 years after her disappearance, an unusual development occurred. A gallery in Seattle held an exhibition of previously unseen nature photography, including several stunning images of Emerald Lake attributed to an anonymous artist. 3 residents who traveled to see the show insisted the style was unmistakably Marian's, particularly her signature use of light and shadow. The gallery owner refused to reveal the source of the photographs, citing artist confidentiality. When investigators finally obtained a warrant to examine purchase records, they discovered the images had been submitted through a lawyer who claimed client privilege and provided no further information. Was Marian alive somewhere, creating art under a new identity? Had someone else acquired her techniques and style? Or was there a more mundane explanation? Perhaps these were simply her works that had been sold before her disappearance. The mystery remained unsolved. Shadow passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1995, 8 years after losing his owner. Lily Chun, by then a college student studying photography, buried him near Marian's cabin with a simple marker that read, "Faithful friend, waiting still." In 1997, a decade after Marian vanished, the case took another unexpected turn. During renovation of an old boathouse on the lake's northern shore, workers discovered a waterproof container hidden beneath floorboards. Inside was a roll of exposed film and a handwritten note that read simply, "If found, please develop immediately." M.W. The film was carefully processed, revealing images unlike any Marian had ever displayed publicly, not landscapes or wildlife, but what appeared to be documentation of unusual light patterns over the lake taken over several months. The final frame showed the same strange reflection captured on her last known day. On the back of the note were numbers that resembled coordinates, but they mapped to a location in the middle of the lake where nothing was found despite renewed diving efforts. The discovery reignited interest in the case. Some theorized that Marian had been tracking unusual phenomena over time, perhaps atmospheric light effects or environmental concerns. Others suggested more fantastical explanations, that she had witnessed something she wasn't meant to see, or had been researching something that led to deliberate disappearance. The rational and the imaginative collided in the absence of concrete answers. As Emerald Lake entered a new century, Marion's disappearance evolved from recent tragedy to local legend. New residents learned her story from old-timers, and her photographs still hung in many homes around the lake. Her cabin, eventually sold by distant relatives, retained her darkroom intact at the insistence of preservationist-minded community members. The official investigation file gathered dust in county archives, occasionally examined by curious detectives or true crime enthusiasts seeking to solve the cold case. Theories ranged from accident to voluntary disappearance to foul play, but no single explanation satisfied all the known facts. Perhaps most telling was the local children's habit of falling silent when passing the spot where Marion's empty boat was found. Even those born long after her disappearance somehow absorbed the sense that this particular stretch of water held secrets. On still days, when the lake's surface reflected the sky in perfect symmetry, it was easy to imagine that answers lay just beneath the surface, as elusive and beautiful as the photographs Marion Wells had devoted her life to creating. And so the mystery remained, changing over time from an active investigation to an unsolved puzzle, to finally a story told in hushed tones around campfires. The tale of a woman who went out onto the water one summer day and somehow slipped between the known and unknown, leaving behind only images that raised questions no one could answer. Emerald Lake kept its secrets, and Marion Wells became part of the landscape she had so lovingly documented, present always in memory but forever beyond reach. As we let the gentle rainfall carry us to our next story, we might wonder about the many unsolved mysteries that exist in quiet communities across the world. Places where questions linger like morning mist over still waters, where answers remain as elusive as reflections that vanish with the slightest ripple. Story 3: Willow Creek lay hidden deep within a valley of towering evergreens, a town that seemed timeless in its quiet simplicity. The rain was not just a visitor, it was a constant companion, a rhythmic backdrop to the lives of its residents. On any given day, the sound of water would blend with the rustling of leaves, creating an orchestra of calm. The streets were often cloaked in mist, blurring the edges of reality, making everything seem just a little more mysterious. The creek that gave the town its name snaked through its center, its waters shimmering under faint moonlight. It whispered secrets to those who listened closely, secrets carried by the rain and the breeze. If you stood still long enough, you could almost feel the weight of history pressing against you, as if the town itself were alive, watching, waiting. In the heart of Willow Creek, the Harlow family lived in a modest house at the edge of the woods. Samuel Harlow spent his days carving intricate designs into wood, his hands steady and precise. Eleanor, his wife, filled the local school's classrooms with warmth and wisdom, shaping young minds while keeping her own family close-knit. Ava and Thomas, their children, were playful and curious, the kind of kids who chased fireflies and built forts out of fallen branches. Their home, surrounded by trees, was a beacon of life and light. Yet, amidst the serenity, there was an undeniable sense that the rain knew more than it let on. It all started on a rainy evening, the kind that turned the world into a blur of gray and silver. The Harlow house was unusually quiet, its windows darkened and its garden untouched. A neighbor, Lydia Turner, was the first to notice. She had walked her golden retriever, Max, along the familiar path near the Harlow property, the rain dripping steadily from the brim of her hat. The house, which always seemed alive with the chatter of children and the smell of freshly baked bread, now seemed silent. Hesitated at the edge of the driveway, staring at the darkened windows. Max tugged at his leash, eager to continue their walk, but Lydia couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She decided to leave it for the night, chalking up her unease to the gloom of the rainy weather. But the next day, the silence remained. No laughter spilled out into the garden, no wooden carving sat drying on the porch, and the school bell rang without Eleanor's presence. Concern turned to fear as days passed without a sign of the Harlow family. Sheriff Alan Grayson received the first call on a Thursday afternoon. He had spent his morning sipping coffee at his desk, flipping through paperwork that rarely required more than his signature. He was used to life in Willow Creek, being predictable. But the caller's tone broke through his routine. A voice trembled on the other end, speaking of an eerie silence that had gripped the Harlow house. By the time Sheriff Grayson arrived at the property, the rain had intensified, drumming against his windshield and blurring his view. As he stepped out onto the soaked driveway, the house loomed before him, its shutters closed tight, its door firmly shut. It wasn't just quiet, it felt hollow. Grayson knocked on the door, his knuckles dampened by the rain. No answer. He tried again, harder this time, his breath fogging in the chilly air. Still nothing. He glanced over his shoulder at Lydia, who had followed him, her dog waiting obediently by her side. Their shared glance said everything. Something was wrong. When Sheriff Grayson turned the knob, he found the door unlocked, swinging open with a creak that echoed through the empty halls. He stepped inside, his boots leaving wet prints on the wooden floor. The house was eerily still, the air heavy with the smell of rain and damp wood. Each room told its own story, or rather, its absence of one. The kitchen counters were clean, no dishes left behind from a hurried breakfast. The dining table sat empty, the chairs pushed neatly under. The fireplace, once the heart of the living room, stood cold and unused. Upstairs, the bedrooms were untouched, the beds neatly made, as if waiting for someone to return. Grayson's unease grew with each step. He had seen empty houses before, but this felt different. It wasn't abandonment, it was as if time had stopped, freezing the Harlow family in a moment that refused to be understood. He stood in the middle of the Harlows' living room, the sound of rain tapping persistently against the windows. The house, though perfectly in order, emanated an unsettling stillness. Everything was in its place, except for its inhabitants. It wasn't abandonment, it was a void. There was no sign of struggle, no hastily packed suitcases, no farewell note. The Harlows were simply gone. Grayson took a deep breath, the damp chill from the open door brushing against the back of his neck. His first thought was to check the obvious places. People don't just vanish without a trace, he told himself. And yet, his instincts whispered otherwise. As Grayson moved through the house, his flashlight cut through the dimness, illuminating snapshots of ordinary life. A pair of shoes neatly by the door, a mug still sitting on the kitchen counter, a stack of homework assignments marked with Eleanor's familiar red pen. It was as though the family had every intention of coming back. Then, in the upstairs bathroom, he noticed something strange. The window was slightly ajar, its lock broken. Rain had trickled in, leaving faint streaks on the windowsill. Beneath the sill, something gleamed faintly in the beam of his flashlight, a single muddy footprint, too large to belong to either of the children. Grayson crouched down to examine it, his pulse quickening. It wasn't definitive proof of foul play, but it raised more questions than it answered. He called it in, requesting backup and alerting his deputy to secure the property. The rain continued to fall as the house was cordoned off, yellow tapes dark against the gray surroundings. Over the next few days, the investigation widened. Grayson began knocking on doors, talking to neighbors, and piecing together the Harlows' last known movements. Lydia Turner was the first to give a statement. She described the unsettling silence, her concern building with each passing day. She also mentioned seeing a stranger in a dark coat walking down the street 2 nights before the family's disappearance. "Didn't recognize him," she said softly. "He wasn't from around here." Another neighbor, Mr. Holcomb, reported hearing a car engine idling near the Harlow house late at night. He didn't see the vehicle but remembered the sound distinctly low, almost like a hum against the rain. These statements were enough to suggest that someone, perhaps an outsider, had been near the property around the time of the family's disappearance. Grayson combed through the town's records, looking for anyone who might have had a reason to harm the Harlows. Samuel and Eleanor were well-liked, their lives unmarked by conflict or controversy. It seemed impossible that anyone would target them deliberately. Still, Grayson pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. 2 weeks into the investigation, a breakthrough came. A hiker exploring the woods near Willow Creek stumbled upon a set of tire tracks partially obscured by mud and foliage. The tracks led to a clearing, where the remnants of a makeshift campsite were discovered. Among the damp leaves and scattered belongings, a torn piece of fabric caught Grayson's attention. It was patterned with small, colorful flowers, the same fabric Eleanor had been seen wearing in photos taken at the local fair. Grayson's heart sank as he bagged the evidence. The clearing was searched thoroughly, but no further trace of the Harlows was found. It was as if they had been there, only to vanish once again. Forensic analysis of the campsite revealed fingerprints on a discarded canister of water, but they didn't match anyone in the national database. The case grew colder even as it deepened. Grayson began to fear that he was chasing shadows. As weeks turned into months, the weight of the unsolved case began to take its toll on the town. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some believed the Harlows had fled on their own, while others whispered darker theories. Grayson, however, refused to give up. He reviewed the evidence again and again, hoping that something, anything, might spark a new lead. But the rain, ever present, seemed to wash away more than just the footprints in the mud. It silenced voices, blurred memories, and erased traces of what had once been. Just when it seemed the case might never be solved, a letter arrived at the sheriff's office. The envelope was plain, unmarked, and the paper inside bore only a few short sentences. "You're looking in the wrong place. The answers lie where the water meets the woods." Grayson read the note over and over, his mind racing. Was it a taunt? A clue? He decided to follow its lead, directing his team to search the area where the creek flowed into the forested edge of town. There, they discovered something they hadn't expected, a small, abandoned shack, hidden beneath the dense canopy of trees. Inside, they found belongings that matched the descriptions of items from the Harlow house. A blanket with a child's initials sewn into the corner. A set of tools with Samuel's name etched into the handles. But the family was nowhere to be found. The discovery of the Harlow family's belongings at the hidden shack brought no clear answers, only more questions. Sheriff Grayson, along with his small team, pieced together what they could, but the truth remained elusive. The absence of definitive evidence allowed room for theories to emerge, each one more perplexing than the last. The rain continued to fall, blanketing the town in its timeless rhythm, as whispers about the case traveled from one home to another. In Willow Creek, a town as tightly knit as the threads of a handmade quilt, speculation was inevitable. Here are the theories that have lingered like the mist over its cobblestone streets. 1. An accidental disappearance. The first theory considered the possibility that the Harlows had wandered into the woods and succumbed to the elements. Some argued that Samuel, known for his love of the outdoors, might have taken his family on an impromptu hike near the creek. Perhaps they strayed too far, lost their way, and found themselves unable to return. The belongings found in the shack supported this idea. The blanket with the child's initials and the scattered tools hinted at survival attempts. But the woods around Willow Creek, though vast, were not uncharted. The locals knew them well, and even in heavy rain, they offered enough landmarks for navigation. It didn't add up. Still, this theory held sway for those who couldn't imagine anything malicious in the Harlow's theory too. Foul play. Others believed that the broken window and muddy footprint hinted at something far darker, foul play. Could someone have entered the Harlow home under the cover of rain, taken them against their will, and led them to the shack? If so, why were their belongings left behind, and where were they now? The stranger Lydia Turner had seen walking near the house became a focal point of this theory. Descriptions of his dark coat and hurried pace spread quickly, creating an image of an ominous figure stalking the quiet streets. But no one could identify him, and no concrete evidence linked him to the crime. Even more unsettling were the tire tracks found near the shack. Though partially obscured by mud, their presence hinted at a vehicle's involvement. Could someone have driven the family away, leaving behind clues that only deepened the mystery? The fingerprints at the campsite, though unidentified, suggested the involvement of someone outside the Harlow circle. Theory 3. A voluntary departure. One of the most controversial theories posited that the Harlows had chosen to leave voluntarily. Despite their seemingly harmonious life, could there have been secrets beneath the surface? Samuel and Eleanor, while admired in the community, were private people. Some speculated that financial struggles, personal conflicts, or even fear drove them to disappear. Those who supported this theory pointed to the lack of signs of struggle in the house. The unlocked door, the untouched belongings, it all seemed intentional rather than accidental. But this idea raised more questions than it answered. If the family had left voluntarily, why hadn't they contacted anyone? Why was there no trace of their plans or whereabouts? Theory 4. The creek's curse. In a town steeped in folklore, it wasn't long before the old myths resurfaced. Some believed the Harlow's disappearance was tied to the creek itself, a place whispered to hold supernatural forces. Stories passed down for generations spoke of spirits that lingered near the water, seeking to claim those who ventured too close. While rational minds dismissed these tales as mere superstition, they found an eager audience among those desperate for answers. The note that led Grayson to the shack added fuel to this theory. Where the water meets the woods seemed almost poetic, as though written by someone familiar with the town's lore. Could the creek hold secrets that no investigation could uncover? To some, it was an unsettling possibility. As Sheriff Grayson reviewed these theories, he realized that each one held its own merits and limitations. The truth remained just out of reach, elusive as the rain that continued to fall. What do you think happened to the Harlow family? Was it an accident, a deliberate act, or something beyond explanation? Theories are often shaped by perspective, and your thoughts could illuminate a path not yet explored. With every raindrop, the story of the Harlows continues to echo through the town. As you listen tonight, let the sound of rain guide you deeper into the mystery. Sometimes, the answers lie not in what is seen, but in what is felt. Years have passed since the Harlow family disappeared from their quiet home in Willow Creek, and the case remains one of the most haunting mysteries in the town's history. Despite the countless hours Sheriff Alan Grayson and his team devoted to the investigation, despite the whispers and theories that spread through the community like the rain itself, no definitive answers have ever been found. The belongings discovered at the shack near the creek were cataloged and preserved, but they provided no clear path forward. The fingerprints remained unidentified, and the tire tracks faded from the mud before more evidence could be gathered. The note, cryptic and unsettling, offered a direction but no resolution. And the Harlows? They were gone, as if carried away by the rain, leaving behind only traces of their existence. The case file, thick with reports, photographs, and witness statements, sits locked in a cabinet at the sheriff's office, its pages untouched for years. Grayson, now retired, often reflects on the case that defined his career, not for the answers it provided, but for the questions it left behind. He still remembers the sound of the rain on the night he first stepped into the Harlow house, the eerie quiet that filled its rooms, and the overwhelming sense that something was just out of reach. The Harlow case has left an indelible mark on Willow Creek. For some, it serves as a cautionary tale, a reminder of how fragile and fleeting life can be. For others, it's a mystery to be solved, a puzzle waiting for the right pieces to fall into place. And for a few, it's a story woven into the fabric of the town, an echo of its rainy nights and foggy mornings. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Harlow case is the power of questions themselves, the way they drive us to seek, to learn, to connect. In the absence of definitive answers, the town has found meaning in the act of wondering. What could have happened? Why did it happen here, in this quiet place? And could it ever happen again? Theories continue to evolve, shaped by new perspectives and the passage of time. Some hold fast to the idea of foul play, pointing to the muddy footprint and the broken window as undeniable evidence. Others cling to the notion of voluntary departure, imagining a family so desperate for escape that they left everything behind. And a few still whisper about the creek, its secrets hidden beneath the flowing water. But perhaps the most haunting possibility is one that can't be neatly categorized. Maybe the truth lies somewhere in the spaces between the theories, in the shadows, in the rain, in the unknown. As the rain continues to fall in Willow Creek, its rhythmic patter serves as a constant reminder of the night the Harlow family disappeared. The mystery remains unsolved, the case file closed yet incomplete. But the story lives on, whispered by those who remember, shared by those who wonder, and carried forward by the rain itself. And now, as you listen to the sound of the rain mingling with this tale, I invite you to reflect. What do you think happened to the Harlows? Could they still be out there, somewhere, living a life no one could have imagined? Or are the answers lost forever, buried beneath the weight of time and silence? Let the rain guide your thoughts and soothe your mind. For in the end, the story of the Harlows is not just a mystery, it's a reminder of the beauty and complexity of the unknown. Story 4 Amsterdam in the early morning hours possesses a quality that feels almost supernatural. As dawn breaks over the historic Art District, a delicate fog often settles between the narrow canal houses and cobblestone streets. The buildings, some dating back to the 16th century, stand shoulder to shoulder like quiet sentinels guarding the artistic treasures contained within their walls. On this particular morning, the fog was especially thick, cloaking the city in a gentle, pearl-gray light that softened every edge and muffled every sound. Nestled between a quaint cafe and a boutique bookshop stands the Vermeer Gallery, small compared to the grand museums Amsterdam is known for, but revered among art connoisseurs for its carefully curated collection. The red brick building with its understated facade gives little indication of the masterpieces housed inside. Unlike the Rijksmuseum or the Van Gogh Museum with their crowds of tourists, the Vermeer Gallery offers an intimate experience with artworks of exceptional quality. The gallery specializes in Dutch Golden Age paintings, with a notable collection including 3 lesser-known but exquisite works by Johannes Vermeer himself. These paintings, each no larger than a modern laptop screen, were considered jewels of the collection, intimate domestic scenes captured with Vermeer's signature mastery of light. Art historians particularly valued these works as they represented some of the artist's earlier explorations of technique, offering insights into his artistic development. Alongside these centerpieces, The gallery displayed works by contemporaries of Vermeer, delicate still life paintings by Willem Caff, atmospheric landscapes by Jacob van Roystel, and several interior scenes by Peter de Hooch. Though small, the gallery had earned international acclaim for the exceptional quality and historical significance of its collection. Hendrik Voss had served as chief curator for the Vermeer Gallery for nearly 15 years. A meticulous man with a scholarly disposition, he typically arrived at the gallery at precisely 7:30 each morning to prepare for the day, walking through the rooms in contemplative silence before the doors opened to the public at 10. This ritual allowed him a private communion with the artworks he had dedicated his life to studying and protecting. On this particular Tuesday in October, Hendrik arrived exactly on schedule, nodding politely to the security guard who unlocked the staff entrance for him. He hung his coat in his office, prepared a cup of tea, and began his morning rounds. The stillness of the gallery in these early hours was something he treasured. Just his footsteps on the polished hardwood floors and the gentle tick of the antique clock in the main hall. As he entered the east wing, where the Vermeer paintings were displayed, he paused. Something felt different. The room appeared somehow emptier, the lighting subtly altered. It took his mind several moments to process what his eyes were seeing. Where 3 priceless Vermeer paintings had hung just yesterday, there were now only empty spaces on the wall. The subtle discoloration of the paint behind them forming perfect rectangles that marked their absence. Hendrik stood motionless, his teacup suspended in midair. His mind struggled to comprehend the scene before him. Perhaps the paintings had been moved for cleaning or examination. But no, he would have known about such a plan. Perhaps this was some sort of elaborate prank. But who would dare? After several long moments of stunned silence, Hendrik finally managed to place his teacup on a nearby bench. With hands that had begun to tremble slightly, he reached for his phone and called the gallery's security director. "Thomas," he said, working to keep his voice steady. "The Vermeers are gone. All 3 of them. Please come to the east wing immediately." Within minutes, the quiet morning routine of the gallery transformed. Thomas arrived first, his face draining of color as he confirmed what Hendrik had reported. Security footage would need to be reviewed, police contacted, but first, a thorough search of the premises. As Hendrik watched Thomas speak urgently into his radio, summoning all security personnel on duty, a curious numbness settled over him. The paintings he had studied for years, had written scholarly articles about, had personally guided countless visitors to appreciate, simply gone. The empty spaces on the wall seemed to stare back at him accusingly, as if demanding an explanation he couldn't provide. Soon the gallery filled with staff members, their morning greetings replaced by hushed, anxious conversations. The assistant curator, Marique, approached Hendrik with wide eyes. Could they have been moved for the upcoming exhibition? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hendrik shook his head slowly. The exhibition plans didn't involve moving those particular works. They were meant to remain exactly where they were. As security personnel began reviewing access logs and examining door locks, Hendrik noticed the gallery director, Willem Clausen, arriving. A tall man with silver hair and a normally unflappable demeanor. Even Willem appeared shaken as he surveyed the empty wall spaces. No signs of forced entry, Thomas reported, returning from his initial assessment. The alarm system was never triggered. All exterior doors remained locked until this morning's opening procedures. "That's impossible," Willem responded, his voice unnaturally tight. Those paintings were secure behind individual alarm sensors. How could anyone remove them without setting off every alarm in the building? No one had an answer. As the initial shock began to give way to methodical investigation, the full weight of what had happened settled over the gathered staff. 3 irreplaceable masterpieces, valued not just for their monetary worth, but for their cultural and historical significance, had vanished seemingly without trace. Police officers soon arrived, their uniforms and official demeanor bringing a new gravity to the situation. As they cordoned off the east wing and began interviewing staff members, Hendrik found himself staring at the empty wall spaces, trying to recall every detail of the paintings that should be there, the play of light on a pearl earring, the subtle geometries of a tiled floor, the gentle gaze of a young woman reading a letter. The gallery remained closed to the public that day. News crews gathered outside as word of the theft spread. Inside, forensic teams dusted for fingerprints and collected fibers, while detectives questioned each staff member about their movements in the previous days. As the day progressed, Hendrik sat in his office, providing detailed descriptions and photographs of the missing works to investigators. How could paintings that had survived wars, relocations, and centuries of history simply disappear on his watch? The gallery's security systems were state-of-the-art. The staff were all trusted professionals, many having worked there for years. What could have happened to these irreplaceable pieces of history? Who could have orchestrated such a precise theft, leaving no evidence behind? And perhaps most troubling of all, where were these masterpieces now, removed from their carefully controlled environment and proper security? As evening approached and the rain continued to fall gently outside, these questions hung in the air, awaiting answers that seemed impossibly distant. The investigation into the missing Vermeer paintings began in earnest as the first day stretched into evening. Chief Inspector Meyer of Amsterdam's Art Crime Division arrived personally to oversee the case. A veteran of numerous high-profile art thefts, Meyer possessed a methodical mind and unflinching patience, qualities that had earned him respect throughout Europe's law enforcement community. His first action was to review the gallery's security systems with Thomas, the security director. The Vermeer Gallery employed multiple layers of protection, motion sensors throughout the building, individual alarm triggers on each valuable painting, pressure sensors under certain floor tiles, and a comprehensive camera system covering every room and corridor. Each security element operated on separate systems, making it nearly impossible for a single failure to compromise the entire network. All systems show normal operation throughout the night, Thomas explained, scrolling through logs on his computer screen. No alarms triggered, no motion detected, no loss of power or signal. Inspector Meyer studied the records carefully. And the morning security checks? Performed as usual at 6:30 a.m. by our night guard before shift change. Everything registered as normal. So the paintings disappeared without triggering a single alarm. Between 6:30 a.m. and 7:30 a.m. when the curator arrived, Meyer summarized, his expression betraying nothing. That's the troubling part, Thomas admitted. During that hour, both the night guard and morning security were present, with continuous monitoring of the security desk. The inspector's team began a painstaking review of camera footage from the previous 48 hours. Every person entering or exiting the gallery would be identified and accounted for. Meanwhile, forensic technicians continued their meticulous examination of the East Wing, photographing and measuring the empty wall spaces where the Vermeers had hung. As night fell over Amsterdam, the soft patter of rain against the gallery windows provided a gentle counterpoint to the intensity of the investigation within. Staff members were asked to remain available, each interviewed individually in Hendrik's office, now temporarily commandeered by the police. By morning of the second day, a curious fact had emerged. Not a single piece of physical evidence had been discovered. No fingerprints other than those of authorized staff, no fibers, no tool marks on frames or wall fixtures, no footprints from unfamiliar shoes. It was as if the paintings had simply dematerialized from their places on the wall. Inspector Meyer gathered his team for a briefing. "We're dealing with professionals of the highest caliber," he noted, his voice calm but serious. "The timing suggests extensive knowledge of the gallery's operations. Let's expand our investigation to include detailed background checks on everyone with access to the building in the past 6 months." The gallery staff, although understanding of the necessity, found the scrutiny unsettling. Hendrik, who had barely slept, provided investigators with detailed information about the stolen works. "The 3 paintings represent Vermeer's early period," he explained, spreading photographs across the conference room table. "The first, young woman with a water pitcher, shows a female figure by a window pouring water. The second, the music lesson, depicts a woman at a virginal with a male teacher. The third, woman reading a letter, shows just that, a woman absorbed in correspondence." Inspector Meyer nodded. "And their value?" Hendrik hesitated. "Monetarily, the 3 together would easily exceed 150 million euros. But their true value is incalculable. There are only 34 confirmed Vermeer paintings in existence worldwide. These 3 represent nearly 10% of his known work, which makes them virtually impossible to sell on the open market," Meyer observed. "Precisely," Hendrik agreed. "Every major auction house and legitimate dealer would recognize them immediately. The art world is smaller than most people realize. So we're likely looking at a theft commission by a private collector," Meyer concluded. "Someone willing to pay handsomely for works they can never display publicly." The investigation continued methodically. Staff interviews revealed no unusual visitors, no unexpected deliveries, no deviations from normal procedures in the weeks leading up to the theft. Camera footage showed nothing suspicious, just the regular rhythm of gallery operations, tour groups moving through the rooms, staff performing their duties. On the afternoon of the third day, a junior detective named Clara Backer made the first significant discovery. Assigned to re-examine every item collected from the gallery's east wing, she had been working through a box of material swept from beneath the benches. "Inspector," she called, holding up a small paper ticket with tweezers. "I found this tucked beneath the cushion of the viewing bench directly opposite the Vermeer display." Meyer examined the ticket carefully. It was a standard museum admission ticket for the Vermeer Gallery, dated exactly 3 months prior to the theft. What made it notable was its pristine condition, unlikely for something that had allegedly been beneath a cushion for 3 months. "Good work, Detective Backer," Meyer said, placing the ticket in an evidence bag. "Let's check the visitor records and camera footage from that date." The ticket provided the first tangible lead. Records showed it had been purchased with cash at precisely 2:17 p.m. on July 15th. Camera footage from that day revealed a slender figure purchasing the ticket, a woman wearing a wide-brimmed hat that obscured her face from the overhead camera. Additional footage showed the same visitor spending nearly 3 hours in the gallery, much of it in the east wing, where the Vermeers were displayed. Unlike most visitors who moved methodically through the rooms, this woman returned repeatedly to the bench opposite the Vermeer paintings, sometimes sitting for 20 minutes or more, appearing to sketch in a small notebook. "She's not sketching," observed Thomas as they reviewed the footage. "She's mapping the room. Look at how her eyes move from the paintings to the ceiling corners where our cameras are mounted, then to the ventilation grates and electrical outlets." Inspector Meyer agreed. "She's assessing the security systems. Let's find out who she is." Unfortunately, the woman had been careful. Her face was never fully visible to any camera. She had paid in cash, signed the visitor book with an illegible scrawl, and exited the gallery without speaking to any staff members. The investigation team now had a person of interest, but little means of identifying her. As investigators continued their work, Hendrik immersed himself in research, hoping to discover who might have the expertise and connections to orchestrate such a sophisticated theft. During a late evening session in his office, sorting through international art theft reports, he noticed a case that seemed disturbingly familiar. 5 years earlier, the Kunsthistorisches Museum in Vienna had reported the theft of 2 paintings by Vermeer's contemporary, Peter de Hooch. The circumstances were remarkably similar: no alarms triggered, no physical evidence left behind, and the paintings had been removed during a brief window between security checks. Most notably, the theft had occurred on October 15th, the exact same date as the Amsterdam gallery theft, just 5 years apart. Hendrik immediately brought this information to Inspector Meyer, who contacted his counterparts in Vienna. The Austrian investigation had eventually stalled, with the de Hooch paintings never recovered. However, one detail from the Vienna case struck a chord. Witnesses had reported seeing a woman in a wide-brimmed hat visiting the museum repeatedly in the weeks before the theft, often sitting for extended periods in front of the de Hooch display. "This isn't coincidence," Meyer stated firmly during the next morning's briefing. "We're dealing with the same thief or organization." The October 15th date is significant, perhaps personally meaningful to someone involved, and the methodology is identical. The connection to Vienna expanded the investigation scope. Records from other European museums were requested, searching for similar patterns and thefts. Insurance companies that specialized in art were contacted, along with international art crime databases. By the end of the first week, another pattern emerged. In the 3 months following each museum visit by the mysterious woman, a series of small thefts had occurred at the same institutions, nothing as valuable as the paintings, but items like maintenance tools, uniform fragments, and in one case, a set of internal security procedural documents. They were gathering intelligence, Detective Backer realized, testing security responses with minor thefts, collecting materials and information for the main operation. Inspector Meyer nodded. "This level of planning suggests we're looking at a highly organized team, not a single individual. And the Vienna connection gives us a new avenue to explore what connects these specific artists. Why Vermeer, and de Hooch particularly?" Hendrik, who had been listening quietly, offered his expertise. They were contemporaries, both masters of interior domestic scenes. They shared similar techniques for depicting light and geometric space. In fact, some scholars believe they may have worked together, or at least influenced each other significantly. "So we may be looking at a thief with very specific artistic knowledge," Meyer concluded. someone targeting related works for a reason beyond merely their value. As the rain continued to fall softly outside the gallery windows, the investigation had taken its first significant turn. The connection to Vienna provided not just new evidence, but context. This wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern, a carefully orchestrated series of thefts by someone with intimate knowledge of both art history and museum security. What remained unclear was the ultimate purpose. Were these thefts commissioned by a collector? Were they part of some larger scheme? And most pressing of all, could the team track down the mysterious woman before she disappeared completely, taking with her any hope of recovering the irreplaceable Vermeer masterpieces? The investigation entered its second week with renewed focus following the Vienna connection. Inspector Meyer expanded his team, bringing in specialists in financial crimes and international art trafficking. With the understanding that they were dealing with a sophisticated operation, the investigators widened their scope, looking beyond the immediate circumstances of the theft. Detective Backer had been tasked with reviewing the employment records of the Vermeer Gallery staff. While the initial background checks had revealed nothing suspicious, she decided to dig deeper, examining not just current circumstances but historical patterns. "Inspector," she said one rainy morning, spreading several employee files across Meyer's temporary desk, "I found something unusual. Over the past 7 years, the gallery had experienced higher than average staff turnover in certain positions, particularly among custodial staff, security guards, and gift shop attendants. While this might seem unremarkable for typically transient positions, Detective Backer had noticed that many of these employees had worked at the gallery for precisely 6 months before resigning with minimal notice. On its own, this wouldn't raise flags, she explained, but when I checked the dates, I found that in each of the 3 years preceding the theft, a short-term employee resigned within days of October 15th. Meyer studied the employment records carefully, so they gathered intelligence from the inside, replacing their sources regularly to avoid detection. "Exactly," Backer agreed. "And here's what's even more interesting. 2 of these former employees listed previous work experience at museums in Vienna and Prague. Both of those institutions experienced art thefts within a year of their employment. This discovery prompted a thorough review of everyone who had worked at the gallery, even temporarily, over the past decade. Each name was cross-referenced with employment records from other European museums, particularly those that had experienced similar thefts. Simultaneously, financial investigators began tracing suspicious transactions that might be connected to the case. Art theft on this scale typically involves substantial funding for equipment, bribes, transportation, and the expertise of various specialists. Following the money might lead them to the orchestrators. After days of meticulous analysis, financial investigator Joost van der Meer identified a pattern of unusual payments to former Vermeer Gallery employees. These weren't direct deposits that would trigger automatic flags, but carefully disguised transactions. Consulting fees for non-existent services, purchasing of artistic works at inflated prices, or sudden gambling winnings from online casinos based in countries with minimal financial oversight. These payments range from €5,000 to €20,000, van der Meer explained during a team briefing. Small enough to avoid major scrutiny, but large enough to buy cooperation. They'd been laundered through at least 3 intermediaries before reaching the recipients. "Can we trace them back to the source?" Meyer asked. Van der Meer nodded. "Partially. The transactions originate from a series of shell companies registered in Cyprus, Panama, and the Cayman Islands. These companies share no obvious connections except one. They all received substantial funding from a private art foundation based in Zurich called the Luminescence Foundation. This foundation, upon further investigation, presented a perfect front. Established 15 years earlier by an anonymous benefactor, it claimed to support art restoration projects and private collections. Its financial records appeared impeccable. Its board of directors comprised respected art world figures, and its public activities seemed entirely legitimate. "It's the perfect cover," Meyer observed. "Who would question an art foundation taking an interest in museums and their employees?" As investigators delved deeper into the Luminescence Foundation, they discovered it had provided grants or sponsorship to every museum that had experienced similar thefts over the past decade. The foundation typically established relationship with these institutions years before any theft occurred, patiently building credibility and access. "This isn't opportunism," Meyer concluded. "This is long-term strategic planning at an institutional level." Someone has been orchestrating these thefts for at least a decade, possibly longer. The investigation now focused on identifying who controlled the Luminescence Foundation. Its legal structure was deliberately complex, with ownership obscured through multiple layers of trusts and holding companies. Its founder remained anonymous even to most board members, represented only through legal proxies. Meanwhile, Hendrik continued his research into the stolen paintings and their connection to other thefts. Working with art historians from the Rijksmuseum, he compiled a comprehensive list of all stolen works connected to the same network. A troubling pattern emerged. The thefts predominantly targeted works by Dutch Golden Age painters who specialized in interior scenes with specific lighting techniques. These aren't random selections based on value, Hendrik explained to the investigation team. There's a curatorial vision behind the choices. Someone is assembling a very specific collection. As the second week of investigation drew to a close, the team received unexpected information from Interpol. A raid on a warehouse in Geneva, conducted as part of an unrelated smuggling investigation, had uncovered high-quality forgeries of several paintings stolen in previous years, including the De Hooch works from Vienna. These aren't typical forgeries, explained the Interpol liaison over a secure video conference. They're what we call substitution forgeries, designed not for sale but to replace stolen originals, sometimes for years before the deception is discovered. The technical analysis suggests they were created by the same forger, someone with extraordinary skill. This revelation added a new dimension to the case. The theft operation wasn't simply stealing art, it was replacing originals with forgery, so convincing that they might pass cursory inspection. This explained how some thefts had gone undetected initially, discovered only during detailed conservation work or technical analysis. We need to determine if this same approach was planned for the Vermeer paintings, Meyer noted. Were forgeries being prepared? And if so, where? The investigation team began contacting conservation experts who specialized in identifying forgeries. If substitutions were planned, the forger would need extensive technical knowledge of Vermeer's materials and techniques, a rare specialization that might help narrow their search. The investigation's expanding scope revealed a network of unprecedented sophistication. This wasn't simply a theft ring, but something more complex, an organization that combined art historical expertise, financial acumen, technical security knowledge, and master forgery skills. The pieces suggested an operation with resources rivaling those of a small intelligence agency, patiently executing a plan years in the making. On the morning of the 10th day, as rain fell heavily outside the gallery windows, Inspector Meyer received a call from his counterpart in Vienna. Austrian investigators had managed to identify one of the short-term employees connected to the De Hooch theft, a woman named Elena Karavik who had briefly worked as a docent at the Kunsthistorisches Museum. We lost track of her after she left Vienna, the Austrian inspector explained. But we've just received information that she may be working as an art conservator in Prague under a different name. This potential lead energized the investigation. If they could locate Karavik, she might provide crucial information about the organization's structure and methods. Teams in Prague began surveillance of the conservation studios where she allegedly worked, while financial investigators tracked possible payments connected to her various identities. As these new avenues were being explored, an unexpected development occurred. The gallery's public information line received an anonymous call from someone claiming to have information about the Vermeer theft. The caller, using a voice distorter, requested a meeting with investigators at the Amsterdam Central Station. This could be legitimate information or a deliberate distraction, Meyer cautioned as the team prepared for the meeting. We'll proceed with full surveillance coverage. Detective Backer, selected to make the initial contact because of her less recognizable status within the department, positioned herself at the designated meeting point, a bench near the station's main hall. Security cameras monitored the area, while plainclothes officers maintained distance at strategic positions throughout the station. At precisely the appointed time, a young man in a university sweatshirt approached Backer. He appeared nervous, constantly scanning the surroundings, clearly unaccustomed to clandestine meetings. After confirming he was speaking to the police, he handed over a sealed envelope. I work part-time at a storage facility in Rotterdam, he explained hurriedly. 2 months ago, a woman rented one of our climate-controlled units. She paid a year in advance in cash and set up a sophisticated monitoring system inside the unit. Last week, I noticed her removing the monitoring equipment. Before she sealed the unit, I caught a glimpse inside. It contained what looked like painting frames and specialized packing materials. The timing seemed suspicious after hearing about the Vermeer theft on the news. The envelope contained photographs the young man had secretly taken of the storage unit door, the woman's rental agreement with a likely false name, and partial records of her access dates. Most valuable was a short video clip showing the woman entering her security code, footage that might finally provide a clear image of their suspect. She always wore that same hat, the young man added. But this last time, she seemed in a hurry and less careful about concealing her face. Detective Backer thanked him for the information, providing a secure contact method should he discover anything else. As he left, surveillance teams confirmed no one had followed him, and he hadn't made contact with anyone else in the station. Back at the investigation headquarters, the team reviewed the new evidence. The video footage, enhanced by technical specialists, provided their first clear image of the mystery woman, slender, mid-40s, with distinctive facial features that could finally be run through identification databases. The storage facility information offered an immediate lead. If the Rotterdam unit still contained evidence connected to the theft, they needed to secure it immediately. "We'll need a warrant," Meyer noted, already contacting the prosecutor's office. "And we'll approach with full tactical support. If this facility contains the stolen paintings or evidence of forgery operations, it represents an extremely valuable target that may be under surveillance by the theft organization itself." As preparations for the Rotterdam operation began, the facial recognition search yielded results. The mystery woman matched identification records for Marguerite Salin, a French conservator who had studied at the prestigious Institut National du Patrimoine in Paris before disappearing from professional circles nearly 15 years ago. Her thesis research focused on Dutch Golden Age painting techniques, Hendrik noted as he reviewed her academic history. Specifically, she studied the material composition and methodologies of Vermeer and his contemporaries. She would possess exactly the expertise needed to create convincing forgeries. The anonymous tip had provided the breakthrough they needed. After nearly 2 weeks of investigation, they had identified a key figure in the theft operation and located a facility potentially connected to the stolen artworks. Whether this would lead them to the missing Vermeer paintings remained uncertain, but for the first time since the theft, there was cautious optimism among the investigation team. As evening approached and the rain continued its gentle pattern against the windows, Inspector Meyer finalized plans for the Rotterdam operation. The storage facility would be placed under surveillance overnight, with the raid scheduled for early morning, potentially bringing them one step closer to recovering 3 irreplaceable masterpieces and unraveling a sophisticated criminal enterprise years in the making. Dawn broke over Rotterdam with muted gray light filtering through persistent rain clouds. The port city, accustomed to early movement, was just beginning to stir as Inspector Meyer's team took their positions around the storage facility. The nondescript building, a modern concrete structure with rows of identical rolling doors, sat in an industrial area near the harbor, chosen perhaps for its anonymity among similar warehouses. The tactical team moved with practiced efficiency, securing the perimeter while plainclothes officers maintained surveillance from unmarked vehicles. At precisely 5:30 a.m., with the warrant secured and all personnel in position, Meyer gave the signal to proceed. The facility manager, bleary-eyed from being awakened so early, provided access to the main security systems. The unit identified in the anonymous tip, number 217, was located in a climate-controlled section of the building, accessible through an interior hallway with additional security measures. These units rent for premium rates, the manager explained, leading them through the facility. They maintain constant temperature and humidity levels, with independent power systems and air filtration. They're typically used for wine collections, sensitive electronics, or valuable collectibles. As they approached Unit 217, Inspector Meyer motioned for the tactical team to take position. The storage unit, unlike the standard rolling doors in other sections, featured a heavy security door with an electronic lock system. The manager used his override code to disable the lock, stepping back as the tactical team prepared to enter. "Amsterdam Police. We have a warrant," Meyer announced firmly but without shouting as the door swung open. The tactical team entered first, quickly confirming the unit was unoccupied. What they found inside, however, exceeded their expectations. The space, approximately 5 meters by 4, had been transformed into a miniature conservation studio. One wall was lined with specialized storage racks designed for paintings. Opposite stood a workbench with conservation tools, pigments, and technical equipment for analyzing artistic materials. And there, secured in custom-built transport frames, were the 3 Vermeer paintings. Hendrik, who had been brought along to verify the artworks, stepped carefully into the unit after it had been secured. His hands trembled slightly as he approached the paintings, eyes widening in professional assessment. These appear to be the originals, he confirmed after several minutes of close examination. I'll need proper equipment to verify absolutely, but the brushwork, crackler patterns, and pigment characteristics are consistent with Vermeer's known techniques. They seem undamaged. The recovery team documented everything meticulously, photographing the unit's contents, collecting samples for forensic analysis, and carefully packing the paintings for secure transport back to Amsterdam. Beyond the paintings themselves, the storage unit contained a wealth of evidence, detailed notes on security systems, architectural plans of several European museums, forged identification documents, and specialized equipment for defeating alarm systems. Most significantly, they discovered 3 partially completed canvases that appeared to be forgeries of the stolen Vermeers, extraordinary replicas that might have fooled all but the most discerning experts. The forgeries remained unfinished, suggesting the theft had proceeded faster than the preparation of their replacements. She was planning to substitute these forgeries once they were completed, Hendrik noted, examining the replicas with professional admiration despite himself. The technical skill is remarkable. She's replicated Vermeer's underlayers and preliminary sketching exactly. By mid-morning, the paintings had been transported under heavy security back to Amsterdam, where further authentication and examination could be conducted in the Rijksmuseum's conservation department. Meanwhile, the investigation shifted focus to locating Marguerite Solin, now their primary suspect not just in the Vermeer theft but potentially as the master forger behind multiple art crimes across Europe. Financial investigators continue tracing the complex web of transactions connected to the Luminescence Foundation, hoping to identify the organization's leadership and financial backers. Their efforts revealed a sophisticated laundering operation that had moved millions of euros through art purchases, gallery investments, and conservation grants over 15 years. 3 days after the recovery of the paintings, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Willem Clausen, the director of the Vermeer Gallery, requested an urgent meeting with Inspector Meyer. Upon arrival at police headquarters, Clausen appeared distressed, his normally impeccable appearance somewhat disheveled. "I need to make a confession," he began once seated in Meyer's office. "I've been withholding information relevant to your investigation." Over the next 2 hours, Clausen revealed an extraordinary story. 15 years earlier, while working as a curator in Basel, Switzerland, he had been approached by a charismatic art collector named Marcus Reinhardt, who had proposed a partnership. Reinhardt, a wealthy industrialist with a passion for Dutch Golden Age painting, had shared his vision for creating a private museum dedicated to the period's masterpieces. He spoke about art with such passion, such knowledge, Clausen explained. He lamented how many masterpieces remained in storage in major museums, rarely seen by the public. He believed these works deserved to be displayed and appreciated. At first, Clausen had been enlisted merely to provide expertise and connections, helping Reinhardt acquire pieces legitimately. But over time, the collector had revealed his true ambitions, to acquire specific masterpieces by any means necessary, creating perfect forgeries to replace them while the originals joined his secret collection. "I never participated directly in any theft," Clausen insisted, though his hands shook as he spoke. "But I provided information, made introductions to security specialists and conservation experts. I helped establish the Luminescence Foundation as a vehicle for building relationships with target museums." Most shockingly, Clausen revealed that Marguerite Solin, the master forger they were searching for, was actually Reinhardt's wife, a conservator whose genius for replication had made the entire scheme possible. "She can recreate any Dutch Golden Age painting with uncanny accuracy," Clausen explained. "She spent decades studying the materials, techniques, even the specific canvases and grounds used by different artists. The forgeries aren't meant for sale, they're meant to prevent the thefts from being discovered at all." Armed with this confession, the investigation accelerated dramatically. International arrest warrants were issued for both Marcus Reinhardt and Marguerite Solin. Financial investigators froze accounts connected to the Luminescence Foundation and its affiliated entities. Interpol coordinated efforts to locate the couple's multiple residences, focusing particularly on a remote estate in the Swiss Alps where Classen believed their private collection was housed. 5 days later, Swiss police raided the Alpine estate, a modernist structure built into a mountainside, its windows offering spectacular views of the surrounding peaks. Inside, they discovered what one officer described as a museum-quality collection that would rival many national galleries. Displayed throughout the home's climate-controlled rooms were dozens of paintings, including works believed stolen from museums across Europe over the past 15 years. Marcus Reinhardt was arrested on site. His wife, however, had apparently fled shortly before the raid, taking with her several smaller artworks and financial documents. An international manhunt continued, with sightings reported in various European cities, but no confirmed location. 3 weeks after the theft, the 3 Vermeer paintings were officially returned to the gallery in a private ceremony attended by the investigation team, gallery staff, and representatives from the Dutch Ministry of Culture. The paintings, confirmed as the authentic originals after extensive technical analysis, showed no damage from their ordeal. Hendrik, who had spent countless hours assisting the investigation, stood before the reinstalled paintings with a complex mixture of emotions: relief at their safe return, professional fascination with the technical brilliance of the thwarted forgeries, and lingering disbelief at Willem Clausen's betrayal. Inspector Meyer joined him in quiet contemplation of the artworks. "They're truly extraordinary," the inspector observed. "I understand better now why someone would go to such lengths to possess them." Hendrik nodded. "What I still struggle to comprehend is the mindset, creating a private collection that no one else could ever see or appreciate. Art exists to be shared, to speak across centuries. Hiding it away seems to defeat its very purpose." "Some people confuse possession with appreciation," Meyer replied. For Reinhardt, owning these works, knowing he had achieved the impossible in acquiring them, became more important than the art itself. The case continued to unfold in the following months. Marcus Reinhardt faced multiple charges across several jurisdictions, eventually receiving a 15-year sentence for his role as the mastermind behind the theft ring. Willem Clausen, in exchange for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence of 5 years. Marguerite Solling remained at large for nearly a year before finally being apprehended in Buenos Aires, where she had been living under an assumed identity while attempting to establish connections with South American art collectors. The Luminescence Foundation was dissolved, its legitimate assets transferred to established museum conservation programs. More importantly, the investigation led to the recovery of 27 stolen artworks from various locations connected to Reinhardt's network, reuniting these masterpieces with their rightful institutional homes. For Inspector Meyer and his team, the case represented both a tremendous success and a sobering reminder of the patience and resources that sophisticated criminals could bring to bear. The theft had been planned over years, possibly decades, with attention to detail that bordered on obsession. In many ways, this was less a theft than a long-term infiltration, Meyer observed during the final case briefing. Reinhardt and his network didn't just target physical security, they embedded themselves within the institutional structure of the art world, building credibility and access over many years. Only that level of patience and planning could have made such ambitious thefts possible. For the Vermeer Gallery, the aftermath brought significant changes. Security systems were completely redesigned with enhanced monitoring and authentication protocols. More fundamentally, the breach of trust led to a thorough reevaluation of governance and oversight procedures across all levels of the institution. Hendrik, who was appointed interim director following Clausen's arrest, found himself reflecting often on the nature of art and its power over human imagination. The 3 Vermeer paintings, modest in size but profound in their quiet depiction of ordinary moments, had inspired both criminal brilliance and investigative persistence. They had survived centuries of history, and now this latest chapter in their existence, to continue their silent conversation with viewers. On a quiet afternoon several months after the theft, as rain fell gently outside the gallery windows, Hendrik watched visitors slowly circulating through the east wing. They paused before the Vermeer paintings, leaning in to observe the delicate brushwork, the masterful rendering of light falling across ordinary objects in extraordinary moments. Few of these visitors likely knew the full story of the painting's recent journey, the sophisticated theft, the brilliant forgeries, the complex investigation that had returned them to these walls. Perhaps that was fitting, Hendrik thought. The paintings themselves remained unchanged by their brief absence, still radiating the same quiet power, still drawing viewers into intimate scenes captured by an artist's hand more than 3 centuries earlier. The art endured while the human dramas around it eventually faded into history. As the rain continues to fall gently around us, let's take a moment to simply listen before our next story begins, to appreciate the rhythm of raindrops, the comfort of knowing that our treasures can be found and returned, and the reassurance that patience and persistence often lead to resolution, even in the most complex mysteries. Story 5 Maplewood was the kind of town where everyone knew each other, a place of tree-lined streets and historic buildings dating back to the 1800s. The pride of the community was the Blackwood Library, housed in a Victorian mansion donated by the town's founding family. The library's curator, Eleanor Winters, had worked there for over 30 years. She was known for her encyclopedic knowledge of local history and her dedication to preserving the town's archives. In November of 2005, as autumn leaves carpeted the grounds and early snowflakes began to fall, the library became the center of a mystery that would perplex the town for months to come. It was the morning of November 12th when young librarian assistant Thomas Reed arrived to find the library's rear door unlocked. This was unusual, as Eleanor was meticulous about security. Inside, nothing seemed disturbed at first glance. The books remained on their shelves, the antique furniture untouched. But when Thomas reached the rare book room, he noticed something strange. The glass display case that housed the town's most precious artifact, the original town charter signed in 1842, was empty. The document, valued at over $200,000, had vanished overnight. Even more puzzling was the absence of Eleanor herself. Her car remained in the parking lot, her office light still on, reading glasses placed neatly on her desk beside a half-finished cup of tea. Detective Sarah Morgan was assigned to the case. A 15-year veteran of the Maplewood Police Department with a reputation for solving complex puzzles. Her first step was to interview everyone with access to the library: the custodian, board members, volunteers, and other staff. Each interview revealed the same sentiment: Eleanor was trustworthy beyond question. Security footage showed nothing unusual. The cameras had mysteriously stopped recording at 9:17 p.m., resuming again at 6:43 a.m. The technical malfunction created an unfortunate gap in the timeline. Detective Morgan ordered a careful examination of the building. Forensic teams found no signs of forced entry. No fingerprints that didn't belong. No footprints in the soft ground outside the windows. It was as if both Eleanor and the charter had simply vanished into the rainy autumn night. News of the disappearance spread quickly through Maplewood. Residents organized search parties, combing through parks and wooded areas. Eleanor's sister arrived from Boston, bringing photographs and stories of Eleanor's life. The community gathered for a candlelight vigil outside the library. The Historical Society offered a reward for information. Local businesses displayed posters with Eleanor's photograph. The town newspaper ran daily updates on the investigation. Through interviews with neighbors and friends, a portrait emerged of a woman devoted to history and preservation. Someone who had dedicated her life to protecting the town's legacy. As weeks passed, Detective Morgan delved deeper into Eleanor's history. She discovered that before becoming curator, Eleanor had worked as an art restoration specialist. Among her personal effects was a journal containing notes about the charter. She had suspected it might not be the original document, but rather a skilled reproduction. This revelation shifted the investigation. Had Eleanor discovered something about the charter that others didn't want revealed? Was this why both she and the document had disappeared? The detective began researching the charter's history, learning that it had changed hands several times before being donated to the library in 1978. 3 months into the investigation, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A professor from the state university contacted police after reading about the case. He had been corresponding with Eleanor about historical document authentication. In their exchanges, she had mentioned concerns about several items in the collection. Meanwhile, Detective Morgan discovered that one of the library board members, James Harrison, had a background in art appraisal, something he had never disclosed during his interview. Harrison's family had connections to the original donors of the charter, creating a web of relationships that stretched back generations. The investigation led Detective Morgan to a small cottage on the outskirts of a neighboring town, a property owned through a trust connected to Harrison's family. There, they found Eleanor, living quietly with stacks of documents and authentication equipment. She wasn't hiding, she was working. Eleanor explained that she had discovered the charter was indeed a forgery. But more importantly, she had found evidence that the original had been replaced decades ago to hide alterations to land boundaries. She had taken the document not to steal it, but to protect it while gathering evidence, fearing that those involved might destroy proof if they knew she was investigating. With Eleanor's evidence, authorities were able to trace the original theft back to a conspiracy involving several prominent families. The altered boundaries had allowed for development of protected historical land. Eleanor was cleared of any wrongdoing. Her dedication to historical truth vindicated. The community welcomed her back with relief and gratitude. James Harrison and 2 other board members faced charges related to fraud and conspiracy. The original charter was eventually recovered from a safe deposit box in a bank across state lines. The case became known as one of the most unusual in Maplewood's history. Not a violent crime, but one motivated by greed and the desire to rewrite history. As Eleanor returned to her position at the library, she implemented new security measures. But more importantly, she renewed the town's interest in their true history. Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about what was taken, but about what was hidden. Not about violence, but about truth. The Blackwood Library still stands today, with the authentic charter now properly displayed and protected. A reminder that history belongs to everyone, not just those who wish to control it. Story 6 Oakwood Harbor sits nestled between rolling hills and the Pacific coastline, a place where fog rolls in every evening and the lighthouse beam cuts through the mist like a sentinel. In the late 1980s, this quiet fishing community of just under 5,000 people was known for its annual seafood festival and close-knit community, where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. The town had one small police station, a main street lined with family-owned shops, and a harbor where fishing boats would come and go with the tide. Life moved slowly here, predictably, like the gentle ebb and flow of the ocean waves against the rocky shore. It's important to remember that behind every true crime story are real people whose lives were forever changed. We tell these stories not to sensationalize, but to understand the human elements that connect us all. As we explore this case, we'll do so with respect for everyone involved. Our story primarily revolves around 3 people. First, there's Marina Collins, the town librarian who had lived in Oakwood Harbor her entire life. At 42, Marina was known for her encyclopedic knowledge of books and local history. She lived alone in a small blue cottage overlooking the harbor, where she would often sit on her porch in the evenings, watching the fishing boats return. Then there's Thomas Blackwood, the owner of the town's antique shop. Having moved to Oakwood Harbor 15 years earlier from somewhere on the East Coast, Thomas was still considered something of an outsider, despite his friendly demeanor and involvement in community events. His shop contained curiosities from around the world, each with a story he was eager to share. And finally, Detective Sarah Morgan, a dedicated officer who had transferred to Oakwood Harbor's small police department after spending 10 years with the Seattle Police. She came seeking a quieter life, though as our story unfolds, she would find herself at the center of the most significant investigation in the town's history. Our story begins on a rainy Tuesday morning in October 1987, not unlike the rain you're hearing now. Marina Collins arrived at the library early, as was her custom, to prepare for the day ahead. As she unlocked the old oak doors of the library building, she noticed something unusual on the front steps, a small, ornate wooden box with intricate carvings that she'd never seen before. Inside the box was a collection of old letters, yellowed with age, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. There was no note, no explanation for why they had been left there. Marina, with her natural curiosity, carefully untied the ribbon and began to read. The letters appeared to be correspondence between 2 people from the 1950s, using only initials instead of names. They described a secret relationship and referenced meetings at a place called the Hollow Tree. What struck Marina as odd was that several of the letters mentioned landmarks in Oakwood Harbor. The lighthouse, the old mill, the creek that ran behind the schoolhouse. These letters clearly had some connection to the town's history. But there was something else that made Marina's skin prickle with unease. The final letter in the stack contained what seemed to be a confession to a crime that had never been solved. The letter read, "What we did that night can never be undone. The tide has washed away all evidence, but the weight of it stays with me. They may have declared it an accident, but we know the truth. I cannot carry this secret alone anymore." In the following days, began to research the town's history, looking for any accidents or unsolved cases from the 1950s that might connect to the mysterious letters. She spent hours after work in the library's archives, poring over old newspapers and town records. After several evenings of research, Marina discovered reports of a boating accident from July 1956. A young woman named Eleanor Reed had drowned after her small sailboat capsized during a sudden storm. The investigation concluded it was a tragic accident, but there had been some initial speculation about the circumstances. Eleanor had been an experienced sailor, and the weather that day had not been particularly severe. Marina also found a photograph from that same year showing Eleanor with a group of friends at the harbor. Standing next to her was a young man whose name wasn't listed in the caption. There was something about his expression as he looked at Eleanor, a mixture of admiration and something else Marina couldn't quite place. As Marina continued her research, she noticed that the handwriting in the letters matched a sample she found in the archives, belonging to a man named James Harrington, who had been the town doctor in the 1950s. Dr. Harrington had left Oakwood Harbor abruptly in late 1956, just months after Eleanor's death, citing a job opportunity in another state. Not knowing what to do with her discoveries, Marina decided to consult Thomas Blackwood. As an antique dealer, he might be able to date the wooden box more precisely, and as someone interested in the town's history, he might have insights she had missed. When Marina showed Thomas the box and letters, his normally talkative demeanor shifted subtly. He examined the box carefully, confirming it was likely from the mid-20th century, but his attention seemed more focused on the letters themselves. He asked if he could keep them overnight to examine them more closely, promising to return them the next day. When Marina returned to Thomas's shop the following afternoon, she found him looking troubled. He confessed that he recognized the box. It was identical to one that had belonged to his grandmother. He explained that his family had a connection to Oakwood Harbor that predated his arrival. His grandmother had been friends with Eleanor Reed. Thomas revealed that family stories had always hinted that Eleanor's death wasn't as straightforward as the official record indicated. His grandmother had always maintained that there was more to the story, but had taken whatever she knew to her grave. The letters seemed to confirm these suspicions. Marina and Thomas debated what to do with their discoveries. While the case was decades old, if the letters indeed suggested that Eleanor's death wasn't accidental, they felt obligated to share what they had found. They decided to approach Detective Sarah Morgan. Detective Morgan listened carefully to their story, examining the letters with professional interest. Though she explained that there were limitations to what could be done with such an old case, she was intrigued enough to look into the official police records from 1956. The original investigation had been brief. The medical examiner had determined that Eleanor died from drowning, and with no evidence of foul play, the case was closed quickly. However, Detective Morgan noticed that several witness statements seemed to contradict each other about who had last seen Eleanor alive and where she had been heading with her boat. One name appeared in multiple statements, Dr. James Harrington, who had reportedly treated Eleanor for a minor injury just days before her death. The same Dr. Harrington, whose handwriting matched the mysterious letters. The key to understanding what happened seemed to lie with finding the hollow tree mentioned in the letters. Marina recalled an old oak tree in the forest preserve outside town, a local landmark known for its massive trunk with a hollow large enough for a person to stand inside. Detective Morgan, Marina, and Thomas visited the location together. The tree was still there, ancient and imposing. Inside the hollow, Morgan shone her flashlight along the inner walls and noticed something carved into the wood, initials, ER+JH, within a heart, and a date, July 2nd, 1956, just 1 week before Eleanor's death. Carefully examining the base of the hollow, Morgan found that one of the roots created a small, natural shelf. On a hunch, she reached into the space and felt something wrapped in oilcloth. It was a small diary, preserved from the elements all these years, with Eleanor Reed's name written on the first page. The diary revealed that Eleanor and James had been in a secret relationship. Eleanor's last entry, dated the day before her death, indicated she was planning to meet James at their special place, presumably the hollow tree, to discuss something important. She wrote that she was nervous but determined, and that everything must change after tomorrow. Through Eleanor's diary and additional investigation into old records, Detective Morgan was able to piece together what likely happened that day in 1956. Eleanor had discovered she was pregnant and was meeting James to tell him. Based on timing and circumstances, it appeared that James, unwilling to risk his reputation and marriage, had confronted Eleanor on her boat. An argument ensued, and in the struggle, Eleanor fell and hit her head before going overboard. James Harrington had lived with this secret for decades, finally seeking some form of confession through the letters he left at the library. Research revealed that he had passed away just 1 month before the box appeared on the library steps, suggesting this was his final act, a posthumous admission of guilt. While no legal justice could be served after so many years, the truth of Eleanor's story was finally known. A proper memorial was established in the town cemetery, acknowledging the true circumstances of her death and ensuring she would be remembered. The case of Eleanor Reed reminds us that the past is never truly buried. Secrets may lie dormant for years, decades even, but often find their way to the surface, seeking resolution. In small towns like Oakwood Harbor, stories become interwoven with the landscape itself, the harbor, the library, the hollow tree, each holding pieces of history both beautiful and tragic. Marina, Thomas, and Detective Morgan remained connected by their shared experience of uncovering this long-hidden truth. Each found a certain peace in knowing they had helped bring closure to a story that had waited too long to be told. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps reflecting on this tale from Oakwood Harbor, remember that even the quietest lives contain depths of experience that we can barely imagine. Behind every face is a complex story of hopes, fears, loves, and sometimes secrets. Thank you for listening to tonight's true crime story for sleep. May your dreams be peaceful, and your rest deep and rejuvenating. Good night.